our Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and my guest today is Jeff Danziger. Jeff is a prize-winning syndicated political cartoonist and writer. His irreverent and sometimes controversial work has appeared in newspapers worldwide, from our own Rutland Herald here in Vermont to the LA Times to the Moscow Times and many more in between. He lives in East Dummerston. He's also the author of several books and anthologies, and his recent memoir, Lieutenant Dangerous, will be published next year. Welcome, Jeff.
Nice to be here.
It's great to have you on the show. I'm taking some time out from your busy sketchboard there at home.
I have been working hard. Yes.
Yes. Well, this is quite a time for you, which we will get into. It's the political arena. The political season is happening.
Well, it's been political 3.5 years.
Yes, it has.
With Trump, there's never any lack of issues and mistakes and foolishness. So
Yes.
we just fall out of bed and he's done something crazy, and
Yeah, and
there's your material, right?
you get it down on paper. Yes, yeah. We'll be talking about this. You're born in New York City.
Yes.
Yes, in the
Yeah.
city itself, and you grew up there.
Yes.
Yeah, and your parents were both artists.
My parents both went to Cooper Union. They met there. They
Yeah.
both studied art.
Uh-huh. And did
And-
some of that rub off on you as a child?
I think so. There was always a lot of paper and pencils and watercolor and tempera around the house.
Yeah.
And people in my family, back when people wrote letters, they would always write letters and have little drawings
Uh-huh.
in the letters as well.
Yeah, yeah. So were you encouraged, or was it just that it was part of you?
We just did it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a big family, and they traveled a lot. And
How many kids?
I was the eldest of 6.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we don't get enough sympathy for that role. But,
You were the leader.
oh God,
You were
yes,
carrying the
yes,
standard.
yeah.
And did you actually go to UVM? You had a Vermont connection early on.
Well, I went to the University of Denver for undergraduate because it was the furthest place from New York that I was accepted to. I just wanted to get out of New York, and then when I got out of the Army, I went back to UVM for a master's in English.
In English?
Yeah.
Going back just a bit, when you were a kid, what kinds of things were you involved with? You did a little art, but that seems to be just part of the daily life.
Just all sorts of things. You know, we spent the summers in the Adirondacks,
Nice.
and we climbed all the mountains, and we did a lot of biking back before biking was as popular as it is now.
Back when we had just bikes, right?
Yes, yeah. I think we started the trend, and then we did a lot of writing and a lot of reading. Seemed to come from a family of autodidacts, I believe is the term. And they don't believe in organized education, but they
Right.
like to make up their own plans. Yeah.
Yeah, uh-huh. Well, that's kind of a nice way to do it. I mean, we might be headed back in that direction with the pandemic, right?
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah. You actually got drafted into the Army in '67,
I
was
was.
it?
I was in Vermont, and the Army then, the draft boards would draft people who had moved away from, you couldn't change the location of your draft board.
Right.
And so the draft boards somebody moved away, they would draft them, because rather than draft their own local boys.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, it was terrible. It was awful,
Wow.
yeah.
I didn't know that. Yeah. So you were primetime Viet Nam, 1967, right?
I was drafted in '67, and then I didn't want to go in the infantry, and I signed up for a language school and Vietnamese, which I didn't know was going to be Vietnamese, but it was. And that took another year, and I thought the war will be over in a year, and it wasn't. And then I got a commission, and that was another year, and then finally, if you got down to under a year that you owed the Army, they wouldn't send you to Vietnam. But I was just right when I got to owing them a year, they sent me over there.
They did. They
Yeah.
did. And you were an intelligence officer?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. We don't really know what that means. I think it could mean various things.
Well, as I say in my new book, military intelligence the joke is that it's a contradiction in terms.
Or an oxymoron.
You're supposed to know where everybody is and what's going on, and you're supposed to be listening to what the enemy is saying over the radio, and that's why they needed people who could understand Vietnamese.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And did you become pretty fluent in it?
I wouldn't say terribly fluent, no. It's a difficult language. You can stop me as soon as you've heard enough about Vietnamese, but it's a tonal language, and there are 6 tones, like Chinese and some other Asian languages. And so if you use the wrong tone, the meaning is completely different, and it's, yeah.
It's so different from English.
Yes.
It's so
well,
completely different.
It was actually written by the French, so.
Wow.
Well, the French were a very cruel colonial power in Vietnam. In fact, they invented the truck-mounted guillotine to keep everybody in. Yeah. Vive la France. And they wrote this phonetic version of Vietnamese, and that's what we use today.
I see.
I didn't do very much translation, but they thought that I could. I had a lot of very strange assignments over there.
Yeah.
So I was with the different units.
Uh-huh.
Right.
And coming home to America at
Yeah.
that time was very different than coming home now.
In '71,
Yeah.
it was the war was over. The economy was suffering, and jobs were not hard. I got a job teaching school at U32, and U32 had just been built.
And what was that?
U32 was a combined high school, a union school.
Oh,
It was the 32nd union school in the state.
in Vermont.
In Vermont,
We're,
yes.
we're
right.
talking East Montpelier, is that right?
That's right, but
Yes.
it's 5 towns altogether.
Uh-huh,
It's
got it.
Berlin, East Montpelier, Worcester, Middlesex, and yes.
I was going to
and
say,
one
good
other-
for you.
and one other one. Calais, excuse me.
Very good.
Right.
Did you like it? You were teaching high school?
Oh, it was great. It was
Yeah.
It was a wonderful school. It was a child of the 60s and the 70s, in
Yeah.
that there were no classrooms. It was a brand new building. It was huge. It was on top of a hill, made out of glass, heated with electricity. You can't imagine a worse, more badly constructed thing for the state of Vermont.
For the state of
Yeah.
Vermont, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, but you enjoyed it, and you were teaching journalism and writing?
I taught English, 11th and 12th grade, and anything else that had to be done.
Yeah. Yes. And it's so you taught after you got back from Vietnam.
That's right. Yeah.
But you also went back and you adopted a young Cambodian girl. Is that right?
You couldn't adopt while you were there in the army,
Uh-huh.
and you couldn't do anything. But after I got back, my wife and I wanted to adopt a kid from Vietnam and or Cambodia, and at the last minute, they told us there aren't any. It was '75, and the war was coming to an end, and the North Vietnamese were coming down from Hanoi and with tanks, and they barely got out. The people that we were dealing with were Canadians, wonderful people, and they had some extra babies that they had gotten from Phnom Penh. And at the last minute, the woman who was in charge, whose name was Naomi Bronstein, she got the Order of Canada. She was the bravest person I've ever known, a little crazy too. And she was given transport on a C-5A, which was a Air Force plane. And they put all the babies they had on this Air Force plane. And the plane went out, and over the South China Sea, the rear door blew off. And the pilot was able to turn the plane around and come back in and crash land in a field. And a number of the babies were killed, and some of the people, the nurses that were on there were killed, and some of them weren't. And she had to go out the next day and pick, see if any of the babies were still alive, and do a triage.
Wow.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. So she was the one who was handling your case for you?
Yes, she had an orphanage in Phnom Penh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you came back from Vietnam with another whole, or for Cambodia with another whole bunch of trauma
Oh yes,
as well.
yeah, right, yeah.
Yes. When did you start making cartoons?
Well, as I was saying we would always write letters in my family, and we do little cartoons,
Little
pictures on the
drawings,
side,
yeah.
little drawings,
Mhm.
spot drawings.
Did you formalize that, your style at some point?
It's changed over the years. It's gotten, I think it's gotten better. It was pretty lousy at first. It was pretty clumsy.
Yeah.
But the technology at the time, this is before computers, the main technology change was that the newspapers went to offset.
Yes.
So that when they got an illustration, they didn't have to engrave anything. They just pasted it up.
Yeah.
And that made a big difference. The Times Argus wanted a local cartoonist, and so they got one.
Yes.
Then I think in 75 or 76, the Herald and the Argus started a Sunday paper. And they had a large news hole. They didn't have very much advertising to start with, and so I would go down and do drawings to go along with it. And most of that was about, life in Vermont, rusty cars and swimming holes and fishing and funny things that kids said.
Mm-hmm. And so the political piece, when did that come in?
I think the main issue then that I started with, as I recall, the Holiday Inn Company wanted to put a Holiday Inn on the hill in back of the Capitol, so it would be overlooking the dome. And we thought, what an awful thing. So I had done a couple of cartoons where people were very happy they got a view overlooking the Vermont Capitol. And finally, because of that pressure, they decided to put it in Stowe.
Interesting. So did you see at that point that cartoons actually have power?
No, I don't think so. The main issue at the time was that in Vermont the laws were so lax that you could drink behind the wheel. You could have a beer and be drinking it behind the wheel. It was against the law to be drunk, but you could drink, and we went crazy about that. And we were a campaigning newspaper. And those laws were slowly but surely changed.
Yes, yes. No, I was, when I was thinking about cartoons, and I think it's such an interesting format because there's so much that you can access, and there's parody, there's lampooning, in so many of them, satire, and all of that you can roll in to one drawing. And I wonder if you could talk about having to be succinct, having to, with a few brush strokes or a few pen strokes, be able to depict something, an idea or an ideology even.
Well, it's like songwriting in that it's a combination of music and words, and cartooning it's drawing and words. Sometimes we feel the best cartoon is the one that doesn't have any words, that the artwork does all the work, but that's not necessarily true. And sometimes the artwork is kind of childish and clumsy, and sometimes it's very authoritative and shows a lot of study of drawing.
Yes, yes.
Cartoons are a very good way of getting a point across quickly. You don't have to wade through acres of gray type and listen to arguments, and it's just there.
Yeah.
And also it's kind of a confection, because people, at least in this country, are always looking for something to be funny. And one of the reasons that the newspapers, I think, are failing is because they're not funny. The comic strips are terrible, and the one or two humorous columnists, I mean, they try their best, but sometimes they just don't make it. It's difficult to be constantly funny. It really it is.
Yeah.
But with the cartoon, people look at it and they go, "Well, this is going to be funny.
Right.
I'll enjoy it."
Yeah, yeah. I found a couple great quotes about you, which I know that you've heard, but one is from your fellow cartoonist, Jules Pfeiffer, who is still alive and well at 90-something.
Two or three,
right? And he said, Jeff creates smart, witty, often hilarious comic nightmares. And
right. Yeah.
that's one. The other is from the noted spy novelist John le Carré, who
Yes.
you know, which we'll hear about, Jeff Danziger is everything a great political cartoonist should be in this over-reverential age, savage, merciless, ribald, and blessed with a lovely eye and hand. It's quite
Very
lovely.
nice. John le Carré wanted to be a cartoonist when he was a young man.
There we go.
So a lot of people don't get over it. He is one of my favorite writers, and I think that he also has the ability to, set the scene, put people in it, and then have them start talking. And that's why a lot of cartoonists are playwrights. Well, Jules Feiffer is a great playwright. William Hamilton is a playwright.
What's the link there? What do you think the link is between those two?
It's the same elements of staging a play. You're putting in you set a scene, you put people in it, and then you have the question of, did this scene just happen? Is it happening as we look, or is it about to happen? And so those are some of the things you have to think about.
Jeff, you've been cartooning now for quite a few years, and as you said, your style has changed, and but it's still a format that you really like and enjoy. Yeah, what is it about it?
I think it, as a friend of mine said, it makes people stop at the editorial page, however briefly. And my person who bought the first cartoon from me was Nicholas Montserrat, who was at the Times Argus then, who was at the editorial page editor, and he was a reporter too. His grandfather was the famous Nicholas Montserrat, who wrote *The Cruel Sea*, one of the great World War II novels. And Nick just said, this is exactly what we want to do, because Vermonters like to read about themselves. They like to think about what it means to be living here, and the problems of getting through daily life, which is a challenge, especially, not just the winter, and then the summer comes and you get your reward for having put up for that. And he liked the sense of humor of Vermont sense of humor very much.
Do you feel like you've incorporated a Vermont sense of humor into your comics?
The dryness of it, yes. I think so. I think
so too.
right.
Yes, and the irreverence. How have you dealt with that over the years? Because I know a lot of people, some things have been very controversial in your cartooning. And can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, the Vermont sense of humor is pretty difficult to define. It's sort of it's a combination of Maine and Vermont. We leave out New Hampshire for obvious reasons. But it is you observe something and then you make a comment about it. You lived here all your life? Well, not yet. Those kinds of things, which is kind of making fun of jabbery New Yorkers and people from Boston who just will never understand what it's like. The main thing is that it's observational.
Yes. And of course the way that you have produced cartoons has changed so much over the years. It used to be pen on paper, and you would submit, and now you have a huge screen in front of you that you're working on. And have you enjoyed that shift?
I love the technology. It's quite wonderful, and it allows me to work quickly. I still work in pencil on paper.
Do you?
And then scan it in, and then it comes up on the screen, and you can make. And not only can you make changes, but other people can make changes as well, which they shouldn't do, but they do.
So editorializing your cartoons?
Well, there was somebody that was stealing the cartoon, somebody in India, and they were rewriting. They would use the drawing, and then they would rewrite whatever they thought was funny to be.
Were you able to see that and get the translation?
Yes, I was able to see it, and we couldn't do anything about it, and so we said, "The hell with it! If it's that important to you, go ahead."
But you've also authored quite a few books as well, along with working for the Washington Post, Christian Science Monitor, LA Times, etc. And I think you're speaking about your job at Christian Science Monitor, which actually you traveled for them over the years.
They had reporters. They still have reporters all over the world, and the reporters, I would get about one trip a year if I went along with one of their reporters. And it was good because the reporters, they didn't like to travel alone, and I'm a terrible traveler, so I like to go with them. So I got to go back to Hanoi and come down from Hanoi down to Saigon
Oh, wow.
with their reporter,
Uh-huh.
their Tokyo reporter, and a man who is now the managing editor of the Washington Post, and that was great. And also go to Russia and the Eastern Bloc and
Wow.
China and some
And you
other
were
places.
covering stories at that time? You were writing. It wasn't about cartoons.
I think I was just going along with, so you get the idea of what life was like in Russia before it changed.
Yeah.
But even Poland
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Very different countries.
oh yeah.
How was it for you to go back to Vietnam and Thailand, going down there?
It was not the guy I was traveling with. I was mentioning Cameron Barr, who is now a managing editor at the Washington Post, and he was a wonderful guy. And I think he was expecting me to flip out and have a
moment.
Manchurian Candidate moment. I never did. It's a beautiful country. It's so underrated, and they're just lovely, warm and welcoming people, and they've had nothing but war for the last 700 years, and
It must have been interesting to go, who knows what other emotions, but to go back there and to see it as a beautiful country and not have a war going on.
most of the signs of the war just utterly disappeared.
Right. Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing how the earth recovers. We might not, but the earth sure recovers fast.
Well, they build. I mean,
Yeah.
they've rebuilt everything.
Mhm.
One of the places where I was is now a golf course for Japanese businessmen.
Isn't that wild? History, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it also brings us to talking about your new book, which is coming out, a memoir,
Yes. Yeah.
which I didn't even know about when I called you to come on the show.
Mhm.
But it's time, it'll be published next year.
It'll be published by Steerforth Press, and the title. Can I give the title?
I love the title,
The
yes.
title is Lieutenant Dangerous. The Vietnamese had a hard time pronouncing Danziger, and it would come out Lieutenant Dangerous, and finally they decided on Dangerous. It was the closest they could get to it.
That's a pretty great name.
It's pretty funny, yeah.
Yeah, it's great. So can you talk a little bit about the memoir? What was it that got you interested in doing it?
But when I was drafted and I got in, the first thing that I discovered was pretty unpleasant, was that the Army itself was a disaster. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't have a clear definition. The people had told them, go over and help the Vietnamese fight off communism. Well, the Vietnamese didn't really care one way or the other.
Mm.
We cared about it.
Mhm.
And then we started to not just advise, but to fight. And it turned out to be a lot harder than we thought. It was a lot more grisly than we thought. Plus, the American soldiers largely were drafted.
Mhm.
And you looked around and you saw that they were people who were from the lower classes. They didn't draft people from Harvard and Yale.
Mm.
In fact, or even if you had any money, they didn't draft Donald Trump, for example, and a great many other people.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes. So is the memoir a lot about those years in particular?
I think it's more about the Army than it is about the
Uh-huh.
actual the movement of troops, and also the terrible. I can just give one example if you have time.
Go right ahead.
Vietnam's major product was rubber,
Hmm.
and the Michelin Tire Company had square miles of rubber trees. Amazing, they were amazing plantations. They were all in perfect rows. The Vietnamese government, the South Vietnamese government, negotiated with Michelin and with the American Army, American government, that no artillery could be fired into the rubber plantations. Well, if you're having a war and you can't fire artillery, where does the enemy hide? In the rubber plantations. So the only way to get rid of them was to go in with rifles and run between the trees trying to shoot these.
Yeah.
It should, the agreement should never have been made. It was made because of money, and it was, anyway, that was just one
Right.
example.
Do we get any personal stories in your memoir? Do you talk about growing up, or?
Well, there's no sex, all right, there's no.
Oh dear.
No.
Well, don't know how well
Yeah,
that's going to
right,
sell
yeah.
then.
Right, yeah, no,
Post 9/11,
yeah.
you had, was it an editorial that you wrote on the 12th, September 12th, 2001?
I was in New York City then, and our reaction was just, why did they do this? Why are they doing that? And so on the op-ed page of the Washington Post, I had a drawing on there, which
You did.
I think kind of summed it up. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
You would sometimes write editorials, is that correct?
I do.
Yeah.
I like to write. You know, it's. I'd rather write than read. I think.
Yeah,
You know,
that's a great quote.
Mhm.
So you get satisfaction from writing as well.
I think so. I mean, it makes you marshal your ideas and your arguments and what you're going to say, and then
Mm-hmm.
you can go back, spend 3 or 4 days not looking at it, and go back and read it and see, God,
Right.
I can do better than that. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you go back in a lot? Do you do a lot of self-editing?
I think so. Yeah.
Your book, The Conscience of a Cartoonist,
Mm-hmm.
and again, that was post 9/11 that you wrote that book?
Yes. Conscience means that you're thinking. You're thinking about what you're doing. And of course, there was the famous book, The Conscience of a Conservative,
Yes.
by Barry Goldwater back, which I never read. It came out when I was in college, and I didn't know what all the excitement was about.
Right. I forgot
yeah.
about that book, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you compare that?
Just the title,
Yeah.
actually, I think it's good because the title said, well, if you're a conservative, what are you thinking
What are you
about?
thinking?
What's the thought process that goes into
Right.
being a conservative? And I'm pretty conservative. I mean, my private life and my money's in the bank, and I'm in bed by 10 o'clock. I don't know what else they want.
Right,
You
right.
know.
At the same time, you are turning things out that are quite irreverent and challenging to a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah,
people.
yeah.
You know, which I'm sure that there's some satisfaction in that too.
It's not really satisfaction; it's sorrow in a way. I mean, that
Oh.
we've come to this, that we're dealing with the current crop of what Trump has done to the Republican Party. I guess I'm more of a Democrat than anything else, but I want there to be a Republican Party,
Mm-hmm.
and I like Vermont Republicans. I like, Jim Jeffords was one of my favorite people, and I want there to be someone to say, well, no, the books have to balance, right?
Yes. Any parting words for us?
Wash your hands.
Thanks for being on this show, Jeff.
Oh, you're very welcome.
It's a
You're
pleasure
very
having
welcome.
you on.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. We'll be following you in those papers.
Mm.
Thanks to all of you for tuning in today and hopefully tuning in next week as well. We are a weekly show. We love having you with us, and we look forward to next time.